Welcome to the Good Divorce Show. Not every divorce needs to end in disaster. It's time to see divorce in another perspective. Here to help with that is your host, Karen McNinney.
Well, hello, listeners of the Good Divorce Show. So happy to have you with us today. You're in for a real treat. We have a fine expert coming from the clinical world. Jung Fitzpatrick is a psychotherapist in private practice and the executive director of the Jung Center in Houston. He holds a master's degree in religious studies from Rice University, a clinical psychology from the University of Houston, Clear Lake, and he received his PhD in psychology with a specialization in Jungian studies from Saybrook University. That's a lot of letters after Sean's name. He is also a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum and part of their facilitator corps. He teaches at the Jung Center in Houston, presents lectures and workshops with a wide range of organizations, and we're happy to be in the classroom with you today. Welcome to the show, Jung Fitzpatrick.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yeah, I actually want to start with a little bit of context of who it is that we're speaking to today. And beyond all the very impressive degrees and the letters after your name, you come with the credibility, but you also come with an extraordinary passion and compassion for the work that you do. And before the interview, I asked you what brought you to this field, what attracts you to this kind of work. And with your permission, Sean, I'd like to just read what you wrote.
Sure, absolutely.
In your own words, my life has been deeply enriched by psychotherapy, both as a client and as a therapist. Sitting with others in their doubt and their suffering and their experiences of change, discovery, and transformation is a profound privilege, and it always changes me. One of my mentors said that he does this because it's the only way he's figured out how to live with himself. And I would say that it's the primary way I can sit close to the mystery of our existence. Just beautiful, Sean. Tell us more about that mystery and the work that you have found yourself doing with couples.
How lovely it is to hear your own words amplified in somebody else's voice. So expressive. Thank you. So sitting with the mystery of existence. I guess I as a therapist, I work with individuals. I'm not a couples therapist, but of course, anytime you're sitting with an individual, you're sitting with somebody who has so many inner relationships. They carry their communities within them. And actually, neuroscience bears this out pretty clearly that we're not one. We have this fantasy, of course, because we have a body that is continuous, and we have one mouth. Right? That we are a single unitary being. And it's not the case. It's not the case symbolically. It's not the case neurologically. We're actually multiple centers of consciousness within us. And so as I sit in my consulting room here in Houston with a client, their single body walks in and they bring all of their relationships with them, right? And all of their history, right? And then actually their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their ancestors all walk in the door with them.
I think that's such an essential reminder. We don't stand alone, ever.
Right, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that in and of itself can be transformative, recognizing that, sort of awakening to that.
Yeah. Specifically, I want to drill in a little bit with you. The moment when, and I know there's listeners out there right now who are in this shared conversation with you and I today, who are sitting on that teeter-totter of, am I staying in the marriage? Am I leaving the marriage? Is this a good marriage? Is it a bad marriage? Should I be in or are we out? And for many of us, that is a real teeter-totter that can go back and forth for a period of time. Mm. And so there is this body of work around discernment. And wondering if you could unpack a bit of what people should be considering and what is sort of the normal and natural progression of relationships. So pull a thread there and let's see where it leads us for those who are in the discernment process.
Well, so I'm going to lay a couple of, let's call them cocktail party words on you.
Oh, great.
So that you don't have to remember these. You can, but they're fun to have in Latin. So the two words I'll use are separatio and conjunctio. They represent these alchemical notions that part of the process of human growth and development always involves separation, right? It's how we come to see ourselves as different than others. It's how we make, you use the word discernment, which I think is beautiful. It's like how we discriminate and see the beauty, the beautiful complexity and nuance of human experience. And for our, in this cultures, particularly Western culture in the last several hundred years, and the rise of Western science has been so much about separation so that we can discern that, all the different little pieces and parts and how they work together. The other word, the conjunctio, is about the parallel process, right? The other side of the process where we come back together, right? And union. And these separations and unions and reunions are just a natural part of the human experience. We make them very specific. We're having very specific experiences of separation and union or reunion within the context of our relationships, right? Our partner relationships. But I think we have to expect that separation is actually part of the process across the course of a life. And even if we have what this cultural ideal, which is the 50-year anniversary of a marriage, right? Which is first of all, we should always dethrone these ideals.
Yes, please.
But secondly, I would say even within that, there are going to be moments when separation happens, necessary separation. It may not look like one partner moving into another, in another place. It may not look like affairs. It may not look like all these sort of external markers, but it often is experienced within a couple as a period of time when they are not relating to each other the way that they used to, and they haven't figured out how to relate to each other in new ways. So I think we could just normalize that separation is a natural and normal part of all human relationships.
I'm reminded of Esther Perel, the great, who you have interviewed and have connected with. And I believe it was her who described once, every relationship is connect, disconnect, repair, repeat. Connect, disconnect, repair, repeat.
Right.
That is normal.
That is normal, and she's the patron saint of this work right now, and it's been so impactful to me that she talks about it confessionally. She's like, I have had 3 marriages with the same husband,
Can you unpack that concept a little more? This idea of 3 marriages, and sometimes it's with different people, but often,
right?
If we can see our way, it's about a reinvention of self within the marriage.
Yes, that is such a beautiful way of putting it. It's a reinvention of self within the marriage. It can be the case that the actual, like what we might call the objective marriage, or the outside marriage, the external marriage to the other person, needs to come to an end for you to be able to connect with new and different parts of yourself, the places where you are being called to grow, right? But the first question that I think it would be wise for us to ask ourselves when we start to have thoughts and fantasies about ending a marriage and moving on is, okay, so what within me needs to separate? What understanding, what has this other person been carrying for me that I need to carry for myself?
Right? Oh, wow. Will you repeat that? I think that's essential.
What has this other person been carrying for me that I need to now carry for myself? We have this cultural fantasy that my great mentor, Jim Hollis, says. He was the mentor from the quote earlier. Jim Hollis says is that the magical other, this magical other person who is going to care for me like no one has cared for me, is going to make me whole, is going to be the sexiest partner in bed, and is going to be the best co-parent, and is going to love me and make me not feel any of this suffering and uncertainty and doubt and pain that I feel just naturally as being a human being on this earth. So we spin up this fantasy that there's this magical other person who's going to make me feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we have this, again, I'm going to name check Jim, and I'm going to tell you the name of his book. It's called The Eden Project for your listeners.
Great. Thank you. We'll get that in the show notes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really good. Best book on relationships I've read. But what he says is that, the first, say, 6 months of a relationship is a kind of a temporary psychosis.
Yes.
The other person is the best, the greatest ever. This is the one.
The pedestals are so high. Oh. There's nothing wrong with them. It is glorious. We're falling in love. There's nothing better.
And we're driven through, like, biology really pushes us toward that, right? Mm-hmm. We have these ecstatic, erotic experiences, and feelings of connection, bonding hormones. And we have all of this. And he'll also say that the relationship only begins when you become a problem to each other. That's when the relationship actually begins.
To be maybe 18 to 24 months. I don't know if we could put a time frame on it, but it's been my experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And personally and professionally, of recognizing that flood of love hormones and our projection, right? There's another cocktail world that clinicians like to use, that we're putting all of that fantasy on someone else inappropriately. It's actually not an act of love to put anyone on a pedestal, because they will disappoint you.
They will, and they have to, right? They have to disappoint you. In order to be human-sized, they have to be humans, right? They can't be gods. They can't be the magical other. And not to go too deep in the cultural weeds, but I would say that this has to do, in our particular moment in time, this has to do with the natural retreat of particular religious forms as binding in culture. Like, we're not born into a culture that is all Christian, for instance, or that is all, where we have a relationship with the divinity that is supposed to manage a lot of this, this need that we have. I think the pressure is only increased with time, that these fantasies that we have, that something is going to take care of us and hold us and make us feel complete, is going to be an actual, physical, skin and bones human being sitting across from us. We used to put it out into the heavens. And it's just so unreasonably overburdened human relationships that it's impossible. Really, it's impossible to have a human relationship and with the magical other. We don't ever. They have to be superhuman. This other person has to be superhuman in order for them to be adequate for us.
Oh, which is just asking too much. And you're referencing some of the work from your own book that you published in 2019 through Routledge, The Ethical Imagination: Exploring Fantasy and Desire in Analytical Psychology. But inside of that, this, as you talk about the inner relationship that might be coming to an end might actually be the relationship that needs attention, not the outer relationship that's coming to an end. And this idea of the 3 marriages, dig into some of that research and messaging from your book around those ideas.
Sure. And I'm going to make a big caveat for y'all. I would love to sell that book. However, it's not a self-help book. It's a theory book. So
a theory clinical book. Let it be known.
Theory clinical book. I don't want, but please buy it, but don't expect it to be a how-to. So one of the chapters I write about a book called Traum Novelle, which is actually the basis for a film that some of the listeners may have seen, called Eyes Wide Shut, with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise. And it is a story. I think it's a story about that transition from the first marriage to the second marriage, between 2 people, where the illusion that this other person is going to meet all of my needs, and that the other person is always only thinking about me, right? Is always only desires me. Right. It blows that up, and I think in a really important way, and makes and makes so for those who have seen the film,
just give us a little recap so we can put
really
it on your Netflix list, because I want to say it was maybe an 80s film.
It
90s?
was 90s. It was famously the last film shot by Stanley Kubrick, the British director Stanley Kubrick, who directed The Shining and Full Metal Jacket and Dr. Strangelove and all these classic, amazing movies. So it also famously tied up Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise for like 2 or 3 years. Like they didn't make any other movies; they only made this movie. And it's a story of he reset it in New York City, and it's a story of a physician, Tom Cruise, and his his amazing wife, beautiful wife, and they have children. And over the course of a brief period of time, basically a night, the Tom Cruise character is sorely tempted to having an affair isn't exactly right. He's taken into a secret society, introduced to a secret society where they have these ritual orgies, basically, and he comes out on the other side of it. He's kind of driven into it by a story that his wife tells about her fantasy, just uncontrollable fantasy for somebody outside the marriage. Like they're on vacation and she sees somebody that's really attractive, and she's really attracted to him, and she didn't act on it, but he can't get that image out of his head. Like he internalizes it. That she would think about anybody but him was, really, I don't know what quite the right word is, but it was foundation shaking. Right. So he goes out and he almost, he almost has a sexual experience, and then, he doesn't. And the movie ends, I won't spoil it, but what I would say is on a note of a radical change in the relationship between the two of them, where suddenly they both have to reckon with how the two of them aren't just magically fused with each other. They're living, breathing, independent, growing. They have the capacity to think and see on their own. And that can be really frightening because that means they also have the capacity to change in ways and to no longer desire the other, right? That's a part of becoming mature, like mature human beings, and having a mature relationship is understanding that really we choose this relationship every day,
Joining us today is Sean Fitzpatrick, and when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit about how divorce lives inside the legal system and how that sometimes can be a disservice to the process of a forever relationship if you share kids. So please stay tuned. We're talking today with Sean Fitzpatrick. He is the executive director of the Jung Center in Houston.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Before you call the lawyer, call the Good Divorce Coach. Give your family the gift of working with a certified divorce coach, a co-parenting specialist, and a mediator. Karen McNinney has the knowledge and skills to guide you through the full divorce journey, before, during, and after. It's one thing to get divorced. It's another to be divorced. The Good Divorce Coach will teach you and your partner how to be divorced with less drama, less destruction, and less debt. Visit thegooddivorcecoach.com to get in touch with Karen.
The boroughs are New York City. The burbs are everywhere else. Real estate is the ultimate game of risk and reward. It's the biggest investment most people ever make. Fortunes are made over a lifetime and lost in a day. And we're not playing with Monopoly money. How do you stay ahead? Who's buying? Who's selling? And why? What do they know? We want the truth. You need an edge. Burrows and Burbs is your secret weapon to giving you the insider knowledge and strategies you need to succeed in the high-stakes world of real estate. From Palm Beach to Palm Springs, Manhattan to Malibu, we press the experts to expose the pain, find the deals, and occasionally predict the future. That's Burrows and Burbs, 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. Because everyone can make money in real estate.
Enjoying our shows and can't get enough of us? Follow us on Instagram at Voice America Talk Radio and see what we're cooking up for you. We're with you wherever Alexa and Google are, at home, in the car, on your smart TV, and your connected devices.
Hey, Alexa.
Hey, Google, play my favorite Voice America podcast on TuneIn.
It's just that easy. But don't forget to make sure you actually mention the name of the podcast show to make it work.
Welcome back to the Good Divorce Show with Karen McNinney. Have a question for Karen or her guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5788. That's 866-472-5788. Now, back to the show with Karen.
Welcome back, listeners. We are chatting today with Sean Fitzpatrick. He is the executive director of the Jung Center in Houston, Texas. We're so happy to have you and your expertise with us today. And we were just chatting about this idea that we have to understand that our relationships are not stagnant. None of our relationships are stagnant because we as humans are not stagnant. And that the need for separation to our inner self, to outer self, should just be part of the normal expectation of how we do life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as parents, sometimes we experience that in a way that we can see it a little more clearly. We're both parents. We've walked a bit of those days.
Right. Yeah. So separation, I think as parents, it's easier to see the way in which this human being we love is changing because it manifests physically, right? They get bigger, right? Their bodies change.
We go to potty training and giving baths and reading books to, can I have the keys and $20?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And pretty quick, like all that happens, really quickly. It's harder to, we lose this perspective, and it's embedded in the profession of psychology. We think of human growth and development as happening from ages 0 to 18, and then it stops. Right, which is not true. We're changing until we die, right? Our life is changed, and our life involves separations as well as these unions, experiences of reunions. That the image that comes up for me is my son as a kindergartner. So we have one child, and my wife and I, and the first day of kindergarten, imagine many parents have this experience, like the teachers and the school let us come into the classroom with them, so we walk down the hall and talk about the school and the experiences and point things out with them. And we're having this shared experience, this little triad, right? This little family unit is having this experience, and we're all kind of a part of that whole. And we leave him in the room, and then we go, and then we leave, and we have our feelings about that. The second day was the killer. So the second day we show up, and they wouldn't let us walk to the classroom with him. So we're going to walk him to the door. And then
there's almost like bouncers at the door, like PTA,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. The principal,
yeah.
And like, goodbye, thank you, parents. You're done.
That's exactly
here.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm. And they even in our school, they actually had a crying room set up. They had a place where you could go have coffee and cry.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. And but just watching Danny, watching him walk down the hall with his backpack on, ignoring the PTO parents who were there to help him. He knew where he was going. He had no problem. He didn't need us. He didn't turn around and look for us. He was good. And that's so that's a natural and a healthy separation that meant a radical change in how we carried him within us. We had our lives, our identities, our bodies really were so structured around him needing constant surveillance and constant care, constant contact. And that moment meant that was over, and it was over for us psychically, right? Symbolically, things had changed. And that didn't mean that when he came home, he didn't need hugs and he didn't need all the
snacks,
stuff that we had been doing,
bedtime stories,
all the rest of that. No, but what it did mean was that we were not that fused 3-person unit, So we were forced to reckon with his separateness.
Right. And he was ready to separate. And, this morning I sent off my 18-year-old and 16-year-old to high school, keys in hand, off the car. It is the last day my daughter will attend high school.
Yeah.
And so I'm on the cusp on the other end. I remember the kindergarten day, and now here we are on the other separation, which of course we celebrate the emancipation. and the recognition of it. But that doesn't mean there still isn't just like a pain and reckoning with my own identity. I think that's the thing I didn't anticipate.
Yes. Reckoning with my own identity, reckoning with my own needs getting met by this person relating to me in this way. Like we get them fixed in time. And this is so true in human adult relationships. The bride that stood before me when I was 26 and she was 28 and, we gazed at each other with love. Like we both have changed so much, and in our romantic fantasy, and it's a collective cultural fantasy, is that this other person is not going to change in some fundamental ways. That once we've created this marriage, that now we are fused in a specific way that will not end. And it's just wrong. It's actually denying of our humanity. And so when we start to think about divorce, that each of us, myself and my partner, maybe have gotten to a place in our lives where that structure of our relationship has to come to an end, right? That doesn't mean the end of the relationship. It means the way the relationship was organized. In a good divorce, which I know can take so many different forms, but what in a good divorce, we're continuing to be in relationship with this person, even if we don't see them on an ongoing basis, even if respectful silence, right, is the way that the good divorce needs to, the relationship has to happen moving forward. We, I think, do ourselves a disservice by imagining that that person is no longer in us. They'll always be in us. They will always be a part of our inner community. We have changed the external terms of that relationship, but we will always be in relationship with them some way, and maybe in some very concrete external ways. To your point, like we might be good co-parents and actively involved co-parents where we're living close to each other, and as we're both involved in the child's major life transitions, and maybe
big events, celebrations, disciplining, all of those things. And my hope is that my clients walk out and they still really have a co-parenting relationship, and the kids know, like, that's my team. That's my parent team.
Yep. Yes.
But this other idea of, like you said, the change of identity, which we can relate to as a parent, like they don't need me to drive them to school anymore. I really am just an ATM and an Uber as needed. However, inside the relationship, also kind of the life shock when someone doesn't need us to still be the thing that we've always been to them, where there is this independence and transformation, and maybe one person is more embracing and in that growth, and someone else might be more stuck, and then the alchemy starts to change.
Yeah, and another way of framing that, I think it's super easy for me as a partner to look at my partner and say, "Oh, they're stuck." Another way of framing that would be, we are two different people who are developing in different paces and in different directions, right? And thinking back with Esther Perel, there can be moments of radical reevaluation of that, right? Radical confrontation with it, and willingness to talk about what's real, and think about what does the relationship need to be now moving forward. So in her case, they decided that they would not end the legal marriage. That does not mean that they didn't radically change the relationship. And some of us can make a decision to end the legal marriage and yet still be in relationship, right? And in a way that is nuanced and thoughtful and cared for, and that we're both thinking about and we're both attending to, right? And not running away from, not hiding.
And certainly in the good divorce journey, often what we speak about is that if you share children, the marriage is ending, the relationship is not.
Right.
We are transforming your relationship with different sort of tools and boundaries and expectations and understanding as you raise these children across two homes.
Yes.
So let's presume that our listeners today, as they hear this and they've discerned it's time, we've all agreed it's time, we're going to end the legal marriage. Are there some specific cautionary tales or things that you see that we do that don't serve the longer outcome, in terms of what we should start paying attention to as we walk down the path of divorce?
Well, I have, yes. So I have, I think, two thoughts that are kind of two aspects of the same thought. So compassion. So compassion means to suffer with, to suffer with. And in a practical term, compassion involves empathy, which we all natively have some degree of. Some of us, I would say, are better able to access it than others. But empathy is simply having the capacity to identify with somebody else's experience and feel kind of what they're feeling. You know, imagine, like, what is this person actually feeling? So it's empathy paired with the intention to be of help, right, for the other. We can be compassionate partners in a divorce, right? So we're attuned to what the other person is actually experiencing, not taking responsibility for it. That's a different matter, right? But attuned to what they're actually feeling and having an intention that we're at least not going to increase suffering, you know? And so the thought that is paired with that is the context in which divorce happens is legal. The context in which divorce happens it means entering into a warrior culture, and often the way it's constructed in the West right now is, by and large, it is, I win if the other person loses. That I have to line up my soldiers on my side and hire my very expensive general who's going to marshal my forces against the very expensive general on the other side and all of the people who are lined up to fight the battle. And it is absolutely the antithesis of compassionate, and it's the antithesis of relating, you know, maintaining relationship. It's a way of hiding from it. I want to be very clear that there are situations which that is the only choice.
That's right.
Right. You
high conflict, abusive, narcissistic.
Absolutely.
Like there's many stories that have to go down that path, but there are just as many that don't.
Right.
Individuals who are listening to us today and like, I don't want to be enemies with my former spouse. I don't want to go to war. I don't want us to both end up with less at the end. Is there a path that we can choose that is more about abundance and less about scarcity?
It is a choice that both partners make. That's the key. Both partners have to make that choice. And when that doesn't happen, you know, the partner who inclines in that direction can take on an undue burden of guilt and responsibility and say, why am I not having a good divorce? You know, what am I doing wrong? And the trick there is in holding yourself to account while not taking on the responsibility of the other person, right? You know, what am I responsible for in myself to my values in this moment as I relate to this person who, you know, with whom I'm changing, you know, the nature of our relationship. And if you have somebody on the other side who is not in that project with you, then you're not responsible for that. You're not responsible for them.
Yeah. And I recently had a client ask, like, can I have a good divorce experience even if they're not having a good divorce experience? I'm like, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the story that you're writing for yourself. And there are choices and you have agency within that. And just like choosing the marriage every day of love, choosing the good divorce every day is just the other way that we enter into that relationship.
I have a very practical story. It's one of my favorite little therapy metaphors that I got from acceptance and commitment therapy. And it applies to so much in life. It definitely applies to this. So imagine that suddenly you find yourself with a rope in your hands and you're being pulled and you barely can hold your ground, but you're losing it. And you look up and you realize you're being pulled toward the edge of a cliff. You're going to fall off the edge of the cliff, and you look a little bit further and you see it's actually a massive gorge. It's this canyon. It's this deep canyon. and you're being pulled and pulled and pulled closer and closer and closer to the edge. And you look up and you see on the other side of the canyon is a monster, 10 times your size. And there's no way that you can keep from being pulled in, and you keep being dragged closer and closer and closer. The question is, what do you do?
What do you do?
What do you do? You drop the rope. Why are you holding the rope?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you holding the rope? So, and the sort of the 5th degree black belt version of that is, why did you pick up the rope? Because, and this is what happens when we're changing relationship. I think the effects can be like splitting the atom, right? We have this incredibly fused system that is coming apart, and the energy release can be terrible and terrific. And but we do still have choice in it. So this person who wants to have a good marriage while or a good divorce while the other is not having a good divorce, I think one of the things you can do is always be asking, wait a minute, do I have to engage in this fight? Why does this person need to be pulling me to the edge? Or do I need to do I need to be a part of this at all? Right? Do I need to allow myself to get emotionally pulled into whatever their drama is, their agony, right? Their suffering. Yeah.
Beautiful metaphor. Such rich knowledge coming to us today with Sean Fitzpatrick, the executive director of the Jung Center in Houston. And when we get back, we're going to hear a little bit more about some illustrative stories of when people have overcome and brought their very best self to their compassionate divorce experience. Please stay tuned.
Voice America is on LinkedIn. Connect with us today.
Before you call the lawyer, call the Good Divorce Coach. Give your family the gift of working with a certified divorce coach, a co-parenting specialist, and a mediator. Karen McNinney has the knowledge and skills to guide you through the full divorce journey, before, during, and after. It's one thing to get divorced. It's another to be divorced. The Good Divorce Coach will teach you and your partner how to be divorced with less drama, less destruction, and less debt. Visit thegooddivorcecoach.com to get in touch with Karen.
A little birdie told me Voice America is on Twitter. Follow us at Voice America TRN.
Welcome back to the Good Divorce Show with Karen McNinney. Have a question for Karen or her guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5788. That's 866-472-5788. Now, back to the show with Karen.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Karen, chatting today with Sean Fitzpatrick out of Houston, Texas. Although I'm not getting much twang today, so I don't know if this is your roots are in Texas.
I have my roots are not in Texas. My roots are actually Maryland and southern Pennsylvania, but we've moved around a bit. So I moved to Colorado when I was young and grew up in Colorado. And but Texas has grown on me, and but most particularly the word y'all.
Y'all is so very useful.
It's so helpful.
One of the things that when I sit down with a couple and we begin our good divorce journey, our first agreement is do no more harm. Yeah. A lot of harm has been done. We don't need to go back and relive it. We don't need to poke at it. We don't need to make new weather. We don't have to poke the fire. And yet this is harder than we might think, because those wounds we carry are very real. And sometimes when we're hurting, we really want to hurt the other person.
Yeah, it's such a hard. So this is the first, do no harm is the great Hippocratic dictum, right? So the beginning of modern medicine starts with this, right? It's part of the Hippocratic Oath. We don't want to do any harm. But the problem with that, of course, is that harm will inevitably occur, right? But there's a difference between, I hesitate to use the word intentional, but there's a difference between inflicting pain for pain, right?
Yes.
And accepting that pain is a part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So a separation involves loss. A separation involves grief, which is the sum of our emotional response to loss.
Mm-hmm.
And we, just by being who we are in the world, not just with our partners that we're divorcing, but also with all the people in our life, our children, for instance, just by being who we are is going to be hurtful in some way. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to be caught in a moment of vulnerability and snap, right? And say something that hurts. So what I would say to this notion of first do no harm is, to the degree that it's possible, is to own it when it happens, to say, you know what, you didn't need that. And I apologize.
Gosh, a repair is really very easy and goes a long way. It's extraordinary how a little repair, personally, professionally, in all parts of our life, but sometimes we just don't own it. Maybe because we don't see it, but
and in divorce, it gets so amplified as because it can then have legal consequence, right? That a moment of acknowledging a mistake and taking responsibility. We're sort of habituated in this culture to understand that is an admission of guilt, and that somebody else is going to then take advantage of that and say, well, you admitted that you did this horrible thing to me, and it's going to be amplified. I just, I would hope that we would be able to give each other more grace. The more grace we can give each other in this process, the easier it's going to be, the better the divorce is going to be.
Oh, I think grace, my understanding of grace is to offer up forgiveness, particularly to those we think that are undeserving of it.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. And grace is largely a Christian idea, though there are analogous words in other languages and in other wisdom traditions. But that's exactly right. Grace is unmerited. If it's merited, it's not grace.
Yes.
Right?
And oh boy, howdy. It is, I think, such an essential ingredient in good divorce. And it is something that we strive for all the time. And even post-divorce, right? The getting divorced is only one part of the story. It's being divorced is when we have to exercise grace over and over again. And chances are your former spouse is going to give you lots of opportunity to practice grace.
No doubt. No doubt.
Which is good for all of us, more grace in the world. There's a story that you have in your collection of someone who was really able to take grace to like this varsity level and compassion, and a couple that did something incredibly surprising on the backside of their divorce experience.
Yeah. And this is not I don't want to say it's a common experience, but it's not an uncommon experience. Like, I've heard multiple of these stories. So the one that I'll tell you, though, is one in which couple divorced, I would say 10 years ago, and in acrimony and mutual, I don't want to say, some accusations of abuse and so on. And my client was the wife in this situation, and had a long trail of a long path to walk after that, of unraveling, sort of experiencing her own grief and loss, and learning how to live on her own independently, and navigating really significant challenges, all while maintaining a co-parenting relationship with the ex and raising a child together. And life circumstances intervened to a degree for her that she found herself next door to homeless. And in the context of 10 years of work between the two of them, of treating each other decently and with respect, without being emotional supports to each other, but treating each other with care, she was able to, the ex invited her into his home and gave her a room and made sure that, basic material needs were met, which allowed her to finish a college degree, which allowed her to get back on her feet financially. And And what's remarkable to me about the story is that there was no quid pro quo. There was no sort of resumption of the old patterns of recrimination and, carping and yelling. And, it was respectful and kind and compassionate. And also without like a strong push to, oh, well, now let's get remarried or let's renew our romantic interest in each other. That time was gone. That's in the past of the relationship. But really, really extraordinary. They continued to grow after the marriage, and the relationship continued to grow and develop.
Yes. And I love broadcasting that story because it reminds people that there's lots of ways to do this. And I think so often what we hear in movies and media are just natural narrative throughout our country is that you have to be enemies with your former spouse,
right?
And you have to go to war.
Right.
And you talked about that warrioring up with lawyers.
Yeah.
And, I thank our legal community who helps us to navigate crossing the T's and dotting the I's. But our lawyers and kind of that industry, they're trained through a lens that says, I am supposed to fight for you and I'm really going to fight for you. And then they end up just fighting with the other lawyer, and the spouses sometimes are just taken along for the ride. And that's not at all what they tended.
That's exactly right. Yes. And it's in their financial interest to get, and this is not, we need law, right? We need this process. It's just that we need other processes too.
That's right. And the lawyers may not be the first phone call you make. I recommend divorce coaches, therapists, counselors, family, those who've done it in different ways, and to be really thoughtful and intentional about the process. And you're right. This idea of reconnecting isn't uncommon. We've had couples on the Good Divorce Show who've talked about that same very thing of our former spouse was, she had remarried, but the father of her children was quite ill and needed caregiving. And so they invited him into their home and saw him through treatment.
Beautiful.
Right? Beautiful.
Yes. We remain family. We're not married. We remain family.
That's right. Yeah. One family, two homes.
Yeah. Yes.
One family, many paths.
Yeah. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the Jung Center, where you spend your time, and what sort of resources are available there, and highlighting what we've talked about today so that our listeners can find more Sean Fitzpatrick, but they can also find, more support. Oh, I would take another dose. We might be able to have you back on the show again in the future, young man.
Would love that. Well, the Jung Center is a really unique place. It has been in existence since 1958 here in Houston. It's named after Carl Jung, C.G. Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist. I often say that for those of us who took Psych 101 in college, he's chapter 2 in the book. Right. For number 1 is Freud usually, and then there's Jung, and then there's a lot of chapters since then. But the Jung Center is a nonprofit organization. We are we program classes, lectures, workshops, really educational experiences at the intersections of the arts and mental health and spirituality. All of which were deeply important to C.G. Jung, and it really is the insights of his psychology animate what we do. And in a given year, we have 150 events that are available, intended for the general public. Some clinicians, some people with mental health licenses come here to get continuing education credit, but almost everything we do is intended for the general public. And so you can, anyone, anywhere around the world can participate in classes here. We have many of our classes are online. Another set of them are what we call hybrid. So there'll be live students here and others online. And some of them are just here in Houston, but we would love for you to fly down here. So we have just recently had a class on relationships and psychological type, and understanding that the other person is not wrong. They actually just really see the world differently, like they're fundamentally different humans. They have a different psychological type, and classes on anger, and just a lovely workshop that we just had on, and we offer annually called The Other Path for women without children, women who have haven't had children, about what that experience is like. This is another unnarrated or under-narrated story in our culture. We so align experience of being a woman with being a mother, and that's not the path that many women walk. And there just aren't ways of thinking and talking about it. There's a lot of shame around it. So,
oh, it sounds beautiful. And I want to give a shout out to Susan Myers,
yes,
Houston-based lawyer who set us up on this blind date and has been on the show. Encourage listeners to go back and listen to her show as well. She is one of those compassionate, thoughtful, well-intended lawyers who is really helping families find the right path. And it's lovely to have your expertise with us here today. I'm curious if there was just a nugget of wisdom that you might pass on to anyone who's listening today who is facing the beginning of their divorce journey. What knowledge, what thought might you encourage them to carry with them?
So I'm going to say two things. The first always is be compassionate to yourself. Allow yourself to see your own suffering and treat yourself like you would treat one of your friends. The second connects to something that I feel is really important to you, Karen. You talk a lot about story and how we're writing our divorce story. And one of my great mentors said, and I say it all the time, he says, the first half of our lives is biography. The second half of our lives is autobiography. And we can think about, as we're going into this process, how the story that I've been living may well have been written by other people, right? With the best intentions, by our parents who wrote us a story about marriage, and by maybe clergy, by teachers, by our communities that told us that this is the only way to be a human being in relationship. And the divorce can begin the process of writing our own story about what it means to be in relationship for me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Sean Fitzpatrick, Executive Director of the Jung Center in Houston, Texas, and many resources to be found. What is the website if people are looking?
You bet. junghouston.org, JUNG, Houston.org.
Wonderful. And I like to remind folks every week to remember everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Good Divorce Show. We hope today's episode has helped you find a kinder, more sensible, and less expensive path through the divorce journey. Until we talk again, have a beautiful week.